Today I'm working with them as professionals and trying to demonstrate the capacity I was demonstrating in some way how to break down our knowledge. Because sometimes we keep our knowledge, we keep it serious or we keep it locked in a certain way. And the more we kept saying, the more I kept saying, what did you notice? What was valuable? What happened? And the more all of that came out, you saw oh my God, there's so much going on in this room right now. And all of that is of use, both to them individually, but also to any number of people that they might come into contact with. Now, it might not happen in the context of a formal concert, and I do formal performances, so I like it. People come in, they sit down, they watch something I've made. I mean, I love that. But I also do all this other stuff. And I feel it's in that I'm trying to liberate for artists to see that the shape of the concert hall may not be the place where all this can happen. And also to keep pointing out the way I was listening. So I kept saying over, did you hear this person just said this? And then they said that. Because I think it's astonishing what people say. Like the idea that Bart said at the end, that craziness, for him, he gets to be crazy when he's not thinking about aesthetics. I don't want that. That's not the word. I want his craziness in the aesthetics. That's what I want. So now I maybe have something to work on. Design, I don't know what you did, but reaction may be the first step. I want to know what yes, of course there's performance, but there are all these other things that artists can bring into the world, and we really need it right now. We just need it desperately.
So we are looking to a memory of 4 years ago when we worked together in Dartington. Liz Lerman, choreographer from the United States and inventor of the critical response process. Liz, really great that you're here in Holland. Of course, you're in America this morning in your place. But I like to start with this fragment, because here we come across some things that are worthwhile things about. The artist reaching out in society, the society reaching into the artist. Before we talk about it, I want to start with a small leader of het journaal from the festival. So this laten we beginnen, I say, and then we see the leader and we engage in our conversation. Liz, when we see back the film, it brings lots of memories, and of course I am in your coordination. I engaged with some craziness and I explored things, and I was intrigued why, as we reach out into society, we were working on the floor. It was not just a conversation. No, we were working on the floor and we were listening. Can you tell a little bit more about this whole idea of you were getting the knowledge, break down the knowledge, you say?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's so great to be with you. And I wish I could be there as opposed to here. I love where I live in Arizona, but to actually be in the Netherlands with you would be beautiful. And it is wonderful to go back in memory, isn't it? There are a couple things in that are interesting to me. One is, since I moved here, I have among many of our indigenous peoples, and there's a person on our faculty, he's a Lumbee, which is a part of a tribe that actually is usually found in what is now North Carolina in the United States. But he says aesthetics is what a people think is good, beautiful, and true. Aesthetics is what a people thinks is good, beautiful, and true. Well, you get to thinking about what this a people is, and you realize that a people can be many, many things. And it can be quite oppressive.
So there is not a fixed idea about what is beauty. There is not a fixed idea about what is a moral truth. There is not a fixed idea about what is knowledge.
And exactly. And I'm at a university now, and at this university, knowledge is perceived by most people as a particular kind of knowledge. I operate in a different kind of knowledge, actually, an embodied knowledge, a knowledge of trying to be in the present at all time, bringing my whole self to the moment, and understanding that sometimes we're thinking about beauty or creative tools, and sometimes we're thinking about the individual over there, but we're thinking in multiplicity.
So that brings an important notion to the whole idea and the whole concept of knowledge. Of course, we are part of a lectorate, we are part of the research in HKU, and we try to open up those other layers also of the body and also of the room we are in, also the social knowledge and the practical knowledge that might be in the hands. And this is why you bring us on the floor, I think, in the film we're looking at.
Sometimes I've been working with a scientist here in biodiversity, and he calls what I do, he calls it experiential inquiry. And for him, it's of course on the floor, in our bodies, out of our seats, and then back into our seats and thinking. And this is the part that's also important. Of course, it's a dual thing, right? We're back and forth between what we're discovering, what we're seeing, what we're thinking, and how we express that.
And maybe one question about why is this so important when we start to reach out more and more? Also in HKU, we have this discussion and we have the ambition and also the belief that we really can contribute to how our society is developing at the moment. So the outreach is getting bigger. But why is this kind of knowledge then so important in the outreach to society? How do you see that?
Well, one reason it's important is look at the trouble we're in. I mean, look at the trouble we are in, and how did the way we think as Westerners or as politicians or however, how did it get us there? And what is it that we have to offer that could change that? And I think a lot of it, unfortunately, it lives under a term in the United States called soft skills, as opposed to the hard skills. But it's of course an untruth. They're not soft, they're hard, they're rigorous. They're really important, but they're humane. Mm-hmm. They have a lot to do with relationship. They pay attention to the individual and the whole. They live in imperfection.
So now you express some of the values you're working on, and you also mentioned dialogue and relation. And maybe at the heart of your work, when you started yourself as a choreographer, and you worked with dance artists, and then you find out, let's say, that in the way we have our dialogues between artists, later between people, the dialogue, the interaction, the way we give each other feedback, that you might say is a soft skill, but in the end is a hard skill, but there it happens, you find out that this is quite problematic. This is not easy to deal with. So how do you speak about the problem in that?
Well, yes, it's really funny because you realize we are being judged and giving judgment all day long. This is one of the major things we do as human beings, and yet we never study it. We don't practice it. We don't think about how could we do this better? And there's so many ways to do it better.
That we judge each other, and we judge each other's, I judge myself, I judge the other, the presentation of someone. Basically, that's all the time happening.
Yeah, it's all the time happening. And I think the way, for example, you're in a meeting and somebody says something and somebody else puts it down right away and says, no, not that, and off they go somewhere else. And typically, if you're female or if you're a person of color, that's going to happen more often. What's going on in that moment? And why does the person who is not just expressing an alternative idea, but putting you down in order to express this idea, what is that about? It is unnecessary.
So there are a lot of power issues going on in our regular, let's say, our regular way of talking. Our regular conversation is full of that, and we are not aware.
We are not aware, or we have figured out our tactics and our strategies for dealing with it. As I often say, I loved dancing when I was growing up way more than I hated the feeling I got when someone would, come and bash me apart. So I kept dancing, but I also concocted strategies so I could survive. And most people do that. It's not like they're taking the feedback. Most of the time, in fact, they're deflecting it. most of the time it's not coming in. You're so busy deflecting. And I thought this was nuts, Bart. We need the feedback. We want to improve.
Yeah,
But
so this criticality, and therefore it is of course very interesting that we discuss this with you in our festival that is about critical quality. At a certain moment, more than 20 years ago, you started to unfold a process that you called the critical response process. And I just mentioned 4 steps in it, and then we will discuss a little bit, because it is very interesting that it grew and it grew. It's in a way, you could say, there's 4 easy steps, but underneath there's a way of living. There are values. It's much bigger than the rules. It's about the values that are underlying. But just for the understanding of our audience, I will explain. When someone, let's say me, wants to get feedback on the work I'm in, then there is a session with 2 or more people. Never mind, you can do it in different ways. Then I express what my work is doing. And the first step is that everyone is giving statements of meaning. What does resonate from what I am doing comes back to me. Then the second step, and that is very irregular to the normal situation, then I'm supposed, the one that starts, to ask questions. What do I want to question? What is the thing that I want feedback on? Then the whole side thing turns around and the responders are asking me the questions. So they are not really saying do this or do that. No, they're postponing the judgment and they are asking me the questions. And then in the last 4th round, there's this beautiful moment that the responders, they have an image, an idea about what it is all about, and also a quite clear idea about what they want to say. They ask, I have an opinion about this or that. Do you want to hear it? And I, with my work, I say, yes, I want to hear it. Basically, this is the 4 steps. The statements of meaning, me asking questions, them asking the questions, and sharing the opinions. And now I want to discuss a little bit further. Where are you now in those 4 steps related to the criticality, I might say? We have a bit of an idea how it works, and I want to invite you to tell us some things about where you're really working on right now.
Well, thank you. And I would say since its inception, it's been under critique by me and others. Always a little bit wondering how biased it might be given who I am, how I grew up, etc. So even from the very beginning, one of my closest friends, Jawai Zahler, an African-American choreographer, says to me, but Liz, it privileges people who can speak. It privileges people who know how to ask questions. And my return is that I understand that in certain communities, you're not supposed to ask questions, but I believe asking questions by and large is a life-saving, life-giving thing. So I think it's okay to practice it, even if it is not of your tradition. Yeah. So already from the beginning were big questions, but each step is undergoing always some issues. One that's come up recently, interesting, is the first step where statements of meaning. Originally it was about, it was called affirmation. And it's because I think I was so wounded. I just really wanted people to tell me I was a good person, And so I soon learned it wasn't about me, it was about the work. And so we moved it to be about meaning. But lately, as more and more artists are dealing with trauma in their work, it turns out we have to go back again also to affirming the maker. In the context of America right now, where so much of the art is about so much tragedy, it turns out that in step 1, it can't only be about the thing you've made. You also need to say to the person, you're brave.
So there is a real important thing in affirmation of this is really what it is. And this is what I like in it, or this is what sounds to be beautiful in it. That opens the space to be able to receive the feedback. Otherwise, the vulnerability of being in this artistic thing is so big that it doesn't work out.
Yeah, It's very interesting to observe. So it's opened back up again. You know, I think in the second, as I said, in each step, trying to get people to really be brave about their questions, not to be frightened, to go ahead and dig in and ask the stuff they're most concerned about.
Because this also asks something about the person that brings in. We are not used then to articulate a clear question. Because we want to say, okay, say what you think, instead of I'm now the one that's going to formulate a question. Why is it so difficult to formulate a question? Yesterday in the festival, we worked also on that.
Right. Well, I think for one thing, unless you get very practiced at this and you decide to make this a way of life and you work at it, things don't appear as questions. They appear as worries, doubts, concerns, obsessions, insomnia. Although that's all indications of what's going on in you, and you have to figure out how to pull that apart and figure out what the question is.
So basically it starts with worrying, not with a question. And what to do then?
Yeah, start with the worry. What does it make you think about? What's the question? So what are you doubting? And then you do this little thing and it's amazing. You can get to such interesting questions that way. And actually some people report just doing that process clears their head and gives them a pathway. Because remember, what we're trying to do in critical response with artists is to get people back to work. Like get me back in the studio.
Back in the studio, yeah.
That's what I want to do. And you can start doing this just for, for yourself. You know, the third step, and Bart, we've talked about this a little bit, the third step is undergoing enormous questioning in a good way. I love actually the fact that the process has been around long enough that the word neutral, which is central to it, the responders ask questions in a neutral way.
Yeah, because
that word, that it's become a flashpoint. Because in the beginning, I wanted people to have to be neutral with their questions in order to account for the power differences in the room. If I'm a teacher and you're a student and I am accustomed to always telling you whatever I think whenever I want, having to make my question neutral forces—
So you don't give a direction, you don't say how it is, or all power issues are out of it. It is an open question, it is neutral.
That's right. And you've got to figure out what's going on for you when you ask that question. So there's a lot of work involved, which I think a lot of people just don't want to do. But now that process and that belief, it's not that people don't believe in it, people do, but I think in some communities, particularly communities of color, where there have been so much oppression and so much distress, it isn't always clear that neutral can feel like a white people telling you to be quiet. Neutral can feel like white people saying you don't really get to have a point of view. It feels like that. That's not what it is, but it feels like that. So we're working through that, and it's very, very interesting, and it's wonderful. It's a fantastic conversation.
So then the neutral actually works the other way around. It works as a way of power instead of being, okay, that's interesting to notice.
Really interesting and worth keeping an eye on. And then in the fourth step, we say you can say no. We say it's about consent. And given the sexual assault issues in our country, again, this idea of a consent is a really important
idea. And consent is that we agree on that I may say my opinion. That's the consent. Yeah.
That's the consent. I ask you, may I do this thing? You say yes. Moment,
okay.
And then I say it. But if you say no, I don't get to say it.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I think we just have to keep practicing saying no over and over, and we just have to practice. Like sometimes I'll do it. What's that?
Is it politeness, or is it impossible to say no? Why is it so difficult?
We want to be nice. Maybe it's good for us. We want to take our medicine. We don't want to ruffle the crowd, or maybe the person asking us is a person in power. And you don't want to, you want your grade, you want your grade to be good. Of course, I hear whatever you say, But
so there's always a risk in saying no.
There is, but if you practice as a group, and I often do this as a warm-up before we start a session. All right, everybody around the circle, no. Like 3 or 4 times, whisper it, shout it, get used to hearing it, everybody. And for some people, just hearing no like that, they start shivering. I mean, it's scary. It's so important.
Now, we've talked about those 4 rounds. I just zoom out a little bit to talk to the audience, because we are, of course, really in the details of how to do it. And I'm explicitly doing this because also here in the lecturate where I'm working, and that's my connection with you, I always feel it's so absolutely important that the details how you exactly work, they contain the issues, big issues in a very small scale. And that's why we now, maybe for the audience, a little bit off track, what are they talking about? But this is about real fundamental issues in how we deal with each other. It's in the way of working. It is in the way how we treat each other. Maybe you want to extend it a little bit.
Well, yes, I would say in some ways it's critical response is a form of practice, almost like a ritual, or as some of my friends say, ceremony, in order to practice things that are hard to keep when you're actually in life. Life goes so fast. But the idea that you would tell somebody that something they've done yesterday or today is meaningful. The idea that if somebody asks you a question, you really listen and answer the question. The fact that you might have a way, if your family members even, or your children, you have advice for them, but they can't hear the advice. Don't give it to them as advice. Make some neutral questions. You'll be amazed at what you can accomplish. And then this idea of asking people permission. Before I tell you something, is this a good time for me to tell you X, Y, Z? It just makes such a difference.
Suppose, Liz, that we are in the 4th round of critical response now. You have been working with a group people yesterday in the festival, and we were asking you to give us some feedback. What could be a good next step for us to do?
Well, I loved what I saw happening, but I would point out that it got tense for a while. Critical response is not free of feeling or judgment, or it's still difficult. And it got very interesting as people got into it about a difference of opinion about contemporary technology and the use of technology in art making and the expression of old forms and new forms. We saw a generational conflict. We saw an imaginative conflict going on. This was over a piece that lasted 45 seconds. And we could have stayed in that discussion for another hour. It was so interesting.
Great.
Yeah. So I think mostly it's just letting people know it's not easy. Even with the steps, it's not easy.
Liz, thank you for this. In the festival, as we discussed before, we produce also Peter, which you know him, and we worked also a lot together. Peter produced with 10 students from HKU that also look for the critical quality in their work, how to do it. And we made, together with the filmmaker Maarten Heijer, we made 10 short films, and we will do 2 of them. And also these students are very privileged because they had the opportunity to ask you a question about the work they made. Of course, it's part of it is in Dutch, but we have been telling you what it is about. So we will ask Peter now, great that you're in. And Peter, what is the first film that you bring to the podium, to the stage?
Thank you, Bart. So the first film I brought is from Tine Tabak, who is a student writing for performance. And you were discussing also about vulnerability, and I think the work of Tine is really also about that. So her work is actually about falling and failing and how to recover from physical but also mental pain. I don't want to tell too much about the film, just let it speak for itself. The film is called Blessa.
Tien manieren om niet te bewegen. 10 manieren om stil te blijven. Houd je adem in. Tel tot 10, tel dan tot 20. Houd je adem in. Tel minimaal door tot 8,5 minuut. Blijven tellen. Geen vragen stellen. Blijven tellen. Desnoods in een andere taal, maar denk niet na. 10 manieren om niet na te denken. 10 manieren om niet te bewegen. Vrees het vallen. Vrees de catastrofe die volgt. Vrees je eigen eenzaamheid. Vrees elke vorm van pijn die met zekerheid chronisch wordt. Vrees elke vorm van geluk die met zekerheid in 1 klap voorbij zal zijn. Vrees je eigen vlees en je broze botten. Vrees elk verlangen. Noem je dromen nachtmerries. Stop direct met gillen als je wakker wordt. 10 manieren om te stoppen in het geval dat je toch per ongeluk bewogen bent. 10 manieren om direct de balans te herpakken. Blijf staan. 10 manieren om te zwijgen. Stel geen vragen, bijt je kaken op elkaar, huil niet. Slik het door. Kantel je hoofd naar achter, laat de tranen en vragen zakken naar de plek waar je het meest gewicht kan dragen. Benen, heup, buik. 10 manieren om geen vragen te stellen, ook al voel je ze branden als maagzuur. 10 manieren om ja te knikken. 10 manieren om door te slikken. Zuig al het vocht uit je wangen weg, leg je tong droog in de kom van je kaak. 10 manieren om door te gaan alsof er niets gebeurd is. Vouw je armen over elkaar, knijp in je bicep. Laat niet zien dat je een bicep hebt. Knijp, knijp, knijp. Duw je nagels zo diep in je huid dat het bloed wegtrekt. 10 redenen om niet te reizen. Je bent een vrouw. Wacht. Het is je taak te wachten. Reis niet. Verlang er ook niet naar. Verlang alleen naar dat wat terugkomt. Het gaat terugkomen. Wacht nou maar. Laat niets achter. Neem niets mee. Blijf waar je bent en stel geen vragen. 10 redenen om geen vragen te stellen, ook al voel je ze branden als maagzuur. Je krijgt nooit de antwoorden die je wilt. Hoe meer vragen je stelt, hoe beter je weet wat je niet weet. Dus stel geen vragen. 10 redenen om niet te beginnen. Neem geen risico's, val niet, breek geen sleutelbeen, breek geen tanden, daar word je lelijk van. Scheur geen enkelbanden. 10 manieren om de dingen heel te houden. 10 manieren om de dingen gezellig te houden. Volg het narratief dat voor jou geschreven is. Lach, wacht, zwijg, lijd in stilte. 10 manieren om niet te beginnen. Kraak jezelf af, maak jezelf klein. Relativeer al je dromen of beter nog, droom niet. Kijk niet verder dan je neus lang is. Kijk alleen naar je neus of naar je handen of naar de grond. Verhef je stem niet, laat je woorden trillen. Alsof je twijfelt aan jezelf en alles wat daaruit voortkomt. Focus je aandacht op het luchthappen. Focus je aandacht op de rode vlekken die vanuit je borstkast als jonge termieten via je nek richting je hoofd kruipen. Focus je aandacht op het prikkeldraad rond je slapen. 10 manieren om te verstijven. 10 manieren om te blijven waar je bent. 10 manieren om elke vorm van hartepijn te vermijden. Heb niet lief. Bouw niets op. Doe geen beloftes die je niet na kan komen, dus doe geen beloftes. Zwijg. Houd je handen thuis. Blijf thuis. Blijf thuis. Neem geen risico's. Liefste, je vraagt waarom ik ben weggegaan. Je vraagt waarom ik alleen wil zijn. Waar ben je naar op zoek? Wie ga je ontmoeten? Ik weet niets. Ik ga op reis als Odyssee. Ik antwoord je binnen 10 jaar. En begin met schrijven zoals Homerus begonnen is. Bezing mij, liefste, de vindingrijke vrouw die zeer veel rondzwierf nadat zij de heilige stad van de eerste liefde verwoest had.
After seeing this, I got a bit quiet. I noticed within myself, but I have a question from Tine. But maybe before I ask this question to you, maybe I can invite you to do maybe a statement of meaning on what you saw. Can I ask you that?
Of course, of course. First, it was beautiful to see, and thank you for letting us all see the work that people are making during the festival and for the festival. I really was interested and excited by when the music was there and when it wasn't. So in the beginning, we get just that foot, and then at the end, we get just that breath. the music's lovely, but those two moments just really set us up for the physicality and the meaning of the body. I think I love that we don't see, Tina, if you're there, we don't see your face for so long. And that really invites us in to be observing everything else that we possibly can about you and the work you're making.
Okay, so I got a notification that I cannot be heard very well. I hope when I speak out a little bit louder, it will be better. I have asked all the students, so also I asked Tina to send a question, and I will quote the question for you.
Yeah.
So Tina says that she strongly believes in the power of positive representation of queer and female bodies in performative cultural practices, especially in sports, dance, film, and theater. Actually to challenge and to change social conventions and narratives about those non-normative bodies. So her first question about that is, do you agree? And if so, how does this influence your work, your creative work, but also maybe your other work?
Well, Tina has asked an essential question. I mean, essential. In the many years that I ran a dance company, our mission statement was, who gets to dance? Where is the dance happening? What's it about? And why does it matter? That was the 4 questions. But the first one, who's doing the dancing? Matters. It matters. So I would say, though, for me, there are 2 parts to this question, and Tina's asked one. Sometimes I used to think about it this way. Okay, people danced in the crops grew. People danced, they healed their children. Dance is central. Well, if that's true, who do we trust? Who do we trust to bring the rain? Who do we trust to heal our children that way? And I think there are a set of values around that. And that could be the oldest person, the fattest person. But sometimes societies get too structured or too constrained or just plain cruel. And then you need the subversives. Then who's doing the dancing isn't about I'm sustaining the values. I'm actually cracking the values open by the very body that I'm going to put forward. And I think probably right now we need, well, probably both of those. We need a reverence for the body because it's been so abused by so many societies, but also this notion that I think Tina's putting forward in this work and is at the heart of her question is, how do we see each other? And to bless each other, as she is suggesting in this work, is particularly beautiful.
Nice, very nice. Peter, you brought another film. There's one second film we will
yes.
look together with Liz.
Yes.
What is that one?
So the second film I brought today is from Sam Laarhoven, who is a student, 4th year student, fine art and design in education. And he works with his colleague, friend Emiel, who is a dancer. And actually they do research together, and research I actually love because it's also part of my own research. And they're really looking at how can you work, how can you get in a cooperation between art disciplines, but in a multidisciplinary way. So how can you do it in such a way that consciously or unconsciously, not one or the other gets higher in the hierarchy. So they're really looking at staying equal. And the film we're going to look at is called Canvas/PODIUM. Sam and Emiel.
En het feit dat mijn podium en jouw doek hetzelfde is,
Nou, ja, klopt, ja.
dat draagt zoveel bij in die
Maar
gelijkwaardigheid.
ik denk dat je hem daar ook al hebt, hè? Dus dat je inderdaad, mijn canvas is jouw podium. Dat we toch op een bepaalde basale manier bezig zijn met onze disciplines. En dat het heel erg gaat om het dansen zelf en om het schilderen zelf. Wat ook vaak niet helemaal wordt geaccepteerd of zo. Er moet altijd een boodschap achter zitten of een concept. En wij zoomen heel erg in op die samenwerking tussen die ambachten. En het belang daarvan.
Ja, wat ik denk daar sterk aan is dat dat staat ook volledig in lijn met dat appel waar we het over hebben. Wij roepen op om diezelfde zoektocht aan te gaan. Om na te denken, hoe kun je samenwerken in die kunsten? Ja. En wij hebben dat in de educatiewereld. Hoe kun je in de educatiewereld die samenwerking gelijkwaardig aangaan? Dit werkt naar een performance. Dus wij willen toe naar een vorm waarin we mensen dit kunnen laten zien. Dus waarop dat appel ook duidelijk wordt als je hier naar kijkt.
Het is natuurlijk een onderzoek en dit is een experiment daarin. En ik denk dat waar we naartoe gaan, dat weet ik niet. Ik denk dat het belangrijk is ook van een artistic research. Dus je hebt een vraagstuk en daar ga je mee aan de gang. Waar je naartoe gaat, dat valt nog te zien. Ik denk dat dit een heel mooi nieuwe stap is, waar we op kunnen verder borduren. Ik denk dat het misschien een mooie nieuwe stap is om inderdaad te kijken hoe is het als we mensen gaan uitnodigen.
We gaan onderzoeken hoe we onze boodschap overbrengen. Ja. Want nu zijn we bezig met ons tweeën. Ja. Maar wij moeten nu gaan onderzoeken en hoe wordt dit voor de toeschouwer duidelijk.
Ja. En boeiend om te zien.
En boeiend om te zien. Ja. Niet te vergeten als
performance. Nee, precies. Ja.
So, Liz, because of the time, I want to get directly to the question of Sam and Emiel, because they have a beautiful, really beautiful feedback question on their work, and I'm going to quote this also for you. So they say, our goal is to transform this research project into a performance, and we struggle with conveying our concept to the viewer without explaining it beforehand. In your opinion, so this is their question to you, which elements should they maintain and which not to achieve this within a performance?
Great. I'm going to go fast too, but let me just say that you really trick us into watching, which is fantastic, by that crazy beginning. You just bring us right in, and that's a great thing. Well, again, you guys have asked a really useful question. I might say one right back. Are you sure you don't want to say anything in advance? You know, what we do in advance of what the thing is that people are seeing, it's not just our question for performance, it's a question for museums, it's a question for people who write books, it's a sequence question. What kind of information do you want to leave people, or clues that you want to leave people so they can come along? And the beforehand may be interesting, and it may be okay, but that's not the question you asked. I'm just putting that in there. What you did ask, I would say the following. Yes, people love process. Everybody's interested in process, but what part of the process? Is it the murkiness of it? How messy it is? And you show us that beautifully. Is it that actually when we're in process, everything counts? Like the whole room counts, the ceiling and the walls count? Do you want us to understand that? Do you want us to understand the difference between collaboration, like that beautiful moment when it looks like it's love that's at stake, and then suddenly it's dominance that might be at stake as the one person stands above the other? Do you want us to say, wait a minute, what's going on here? Is the painter more important than the mover? And you get us into a whole question now about, well, collaboration and power. any of these things are fantastic. They're all interesting. My point would simply be, or the question back would be, how would you like us to know what's going on? How do you want us to be in there? I'm sorry, I don't know Dutch, so you may have been giving all kinds of text clues that I didn't understand. But I think it's almost like winking with the audience. Come with me, come with me. I'm going to give you this much so that you can come in and be with us.
Great, great. Thank you, Peter, for bringing in the film. Thank you, Liz, for responding to it. And then we take you to the last part of the program. And this festival, the abundance of this festival is so big this year that we invited also students and participants in our research cycle to bring a session to the festival. And I want to express that because the festival in itself is a stage for showing, but it is also an inquiry process. It is a research process. What I, in your work, Liz, always admire is that you keep on researching your own process. So this festival is not only a stage to demonstrate, it is also a place to research where are you in the process. We will look to 2 short films. What are results, or not, maybe not results? What are the critical issues that people think about their own session when they're just finished? So the same filmmaker, Maarten Heijer, is in the festival, viewing the things and asking the people when they're finished, okay, what do you think about it? What was it? What happened? To help them in this process of critical quality. Let's look to the first one with Rob van der Poel and Ilse Speelman, just after the session was finished.
Spannend in het begin.
Ja, zeker ja. Grappig toch weer, hè?
Ja, ik had ook echt zoiets van, wat zijn we nou aan het doen? Dat is toch helemaal niet nodig?
Helemaal niet nodig, joh. Of misschien ook wel. Daardoor kwamen we
Ja.
juist los.
Ja, nee, het was wel grappig ook. Ja. Ik heb het al lang niet meer gehad, zo in het begin. Dat ik dan vastliep of zo.
We hebben een avond gehad over spelen, kunst en maken. Of dat sleutels zijn tot andere onderwijs. Ilse en ik. En we hadden een heel vol programma. Met allerlei schitterende werkvormen. Waarbij mensen iets van zichzelf konden laten zien. En naar elkaar toe. Naar elkaars opgave, in elkaars opgave, aan elkaars opgave konden werken. En hun eigen opgave wat meer in beeld kregen. En het leuke van deze avond is wat mij betreft dat we al heel snel zelf vastliepen. Misschien Ilse, dat jij daar iets over kan zeggen.
Ja, het gebeurde bij mij. Dus we begonnen met te vertellen wat we deze avond gingen doen. En hoe we hier terecht zijn gekomen. En ons eigen verhaal. En daar liep ik al na 3 zinnen vast. Maar dat staat dus ook wel een beetje... Dat is ook wel typerend voor wat we... Eigenlijk zochten we dat ook een beetje op. Dat risico van jezelf inbrengen. En ja, nu gebeurt het natuurlijk weer als ik erover praat.
Het is heel grappig. Wij kenden elkaar natuurlijk wel vanuit de andere sessies, maar we hadden nog nooit samengewerkt. Dus er zat dus zeker een spanning dan op de lijn. En je hebt een soort programma. En ja, gelukkig gebeurde er in het begin gelijk al. Hadden we een vastloper, niet alleen bij Ilse hoor, want ik zat ook op een bepaald moment met mijn mond vol tanden. En dat bracht ons eigenlijk terug in het moment. En eigenlijk waardoor we heel snel, wat mij betreft, konden loslaten en konden zijn met wat er eigenlijk gebeurde. En dat was denk ik ook heel essentieel in onderwijs of in een relatie van leraar-leerling. Dat je niet met allerlei voorgeprogrammeerde gedachten een leerling benadert. Maar dat je het open houdt. Dat je misschien wel goed voorbereid bent. En weet wat je aan het doen bent. Maar dat je wel het onderwijs zich ontvouwt in het handelen. En in de relatie tussen docent en leerling. En daar komt het spelen en de kunsten en het maken, dat zijn daar, daar hebben we althans wat ervaring in aangeboden aan de mensen die meededen. Waardoor zij mogelijk tot inzichten komen of tot een manier van werken die erg stimulerend is.
This short film is just finished. It is only a few minutes, so we couldn't show it to you before. But what Rob and Ilse are expressing are basically that they took a risk. They have prepared lots of things, but in the end, everything went different. So they started to learn from it. They accepted that they partly failed and started to learn. And in my perception, it is very good to address also this issue of, let's say, the possibility of failing or the possibility of having the feeling of failing and taking a risk and that you don't know exactly where it goes. So maybe the last thing is for you to respond to the theme. Of course, you cannot address exactly what they were saying because they were saying it in Dutch, but we all know that in the work, there's this risk. It goes different than you think it goes. And maybe that's the last thing to respond to.
You know, our bodies tell us so much, and when we're failing, there's just this horrible, the pit of your stomach, or you crawl, I mean, people have so many ways of describing it. I consider this a clue. This is a gateway. My body's telling me, Liz, pay attention. Something is happening here. Pay attention. Because I believe what follows that are a few things. One is usually we save ourselves. And when we are saving ourselves, we are at the beginning of new tools. We are at the beginning of new understandings. And if you pay attention to that too, you can come back to that. And I don't mean just to make you feel better. I mean that when you're saving yourself, something's happening. And the other thing that happens is in English, I would say it goes, oh, I wish I had done this. I wish I had done that. That language is now not your stomach telling you, that's your intellect telling you. Pay attention. There's information in these wishes that you can cycle the very next time you go into the studio.
Liz, it was really great to have you here yesterday evening and now in this journaal from the festival. Really lovely to talk to you.
Thank you.
Hope we meet again and talk further.
I hope so.
Share the development of all these things. The last thing is the sound of this cello. I want to play something back as a resonance to the conversation we had. And to the audience, I say tomorrow at 5 we're here again, and then we will invite the Dutch theater director Lotte van den Berg. So please enjoy also tomorrow. Great.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Also to the audience, and hope to see you back.